There's a lot of stuff you can learn that the game doesn't teach you on lower difficulties, and purely watching someone wouldn't be enough. I'm often asked how I survive certain situations when I shouldn't, or why content creators seem to have an easier game. So, in this video, I will focus on teaching you the basics to answer these questions, but also how to use a style that's always worked for me. It's probable some of the things won't work well for you, so use your reasoning to decide what applies to you. That being said, I believe that with enough practice, you'll be able to apply strategies and enjoy DS a bit more without struggling as much and get that juicy 1 down achievement. There are 5 assault stages in the game. Sustain, Fade and Control are the ones we will focus on. On Fade, enemies will stop spawning. Sustain is the opposite. This is when cops keep spawning and you won't be able to keep the map 100% clean even if you are the best player. If your team isn't the greatest or you aren't capable of out-killing enemy spawns, Fade is gonna be the most important tool for you. There is no reason for you to risk your life by forcing objectives unless you're doing the Revenant playstyle. Timing is very important. Majority of the player base either hides in one spot the entire heist or forces objectives too hard. Fade solves this. The hard part is knowing when it becomes Fade. There are multiple ways to find out. Cops behave differently. Once it's Fade, they will start rushing in bigger numbers and will stop spawning. If at one point you could relax in some spot and suddenly you no longer could, that's the first indicator that it's Fade. Most of us just use the mod called Better Assault Indicator that displays what state of assault it currently is. Some people would probably argue that it's a cheat, so use it at your own discretion. After Fade, there's Control. This is also a pretty important tool because this is when the cops start retreating to their spawn points. How do you tell it's Control? Fade does not change the song from its assault state, while Control will go to the song's control section. This is accompanied with a one-liner from Bane.
Wow, never seen anything like that. Now, don't lose your advantage, guys.
Now you know what objectives shouldn't be done at random times and how making use of the assault states provides a huge advantage. Despite the difference in damage, there's one constant between deathwish and death sentence. Knowing ahead of time what objectives are waiting for you, where cover is, and what events might happen on the map is a game changer. If you don't feel very comfortable on death sentence, play the heist on deathwish first, learn everything, and only then consider going up with the difficulty. Memorize enemy spawns. This is extremely important. Remember that cop spawn points are always the same. This gives you much more control over the map than you might think. First of all, you can kill enemies the moment they spawn, and it can either be hard or easy depending on the map. For example, this spawn point. I can just go here. Enemies spawn and I don't even have to move to clear them. No risk, high reward if someone were to do the tanker objective here. The cops can't do anything to me. Whether I play the weakest perk deck or not, it doesn't really matter if I just don't give enemies the chance to shoot me in the first place. Let's go over an ideal situation where everyone knows where enemies spawn. You go here and cover this area. Another person goes and holds the spawns here. The third person here. And the fourth one here. If there is no active objective that you have to do, that would be the ideal setup. No team coordinates like that, but this serves more as an example that it's possible to have almost 0 cops on the map, even on death sentence. On some maps, you can shut down most enemy spawn points on your own, and Panic Room would be the best heist to showcase that. Normally there always seems to be thousands of cops on this heist, but take a sniper with ammo bags, move up here, and just keep checking 2 roofs. Sometimes it can get spammy with dozers, so ideally you want 2 people on the roof and the other 2 can just run around the building. Knowing enemy spawns allows you to apply proper strategies and turn certain maps into a complete joke. Obviously, it helps greatly with doing objectives as well. Not only is there more room with fewer cops on the map, but getting caught off guard is much less likely to happen. Where can I learn about enemy spawns? Unfortunately, there's no guide that shows them, so playing the game on your own is the most optimal way to learn that. Of course, you can also just watch someone play and pay attention to the spawns. Most sniper spawns are different, but their spawns are not random either. The rule doesn't change though. Pay attention to where they spawn and just memorize. Knowledge of upcoming objectives. Knowing where items required to progress are, where to go, what to trigger, and so on. It's best to be aware of it beforehand to make sure you don't waste time. My favorite example for this one is the first day of Goat Simulator. A big map, 15 goats and lots of spawns around sounds terrifying. Some people say day 1 is harder, others say day 2 is. If you think day 1 is harder, I will now show you a trick that will very likely change your opinion. So, did you know that you have slightly over a minute before any regular death sentence cop spawns? Let's assume there's 3 of you. All of you know where the goats are and split accordingly. Some goats take a bit of time before they can be reached, but overall 5 goats per person is all you need in order to succeed. getting 15 goods within a minute is unlikely. But if you make use of that time, you can easily get at least 10 of them safely, which ultimately allows you to skip half the heist with very little effort other than map knowledge. There is cover you should avoid. Sounds stupid, doesn't it? Here's something no one has ever demonstrated. Some of the maps are very poorly designed in this game, with Green Bridge being the best example. You have cover on both sides. It looks like there's no difference between them, right? What if I told you that one of them is a trap? I haven't paid attention to those spots on most maps, but remember to experiment with cover on each heist to find the optimal spots. Grace period is a fantastic mechanic that gives you a 0.35 second window of invulnerability after getting hit, but it only works against damage that is equal or lower. Heavy units on death sentence do 225 damage, while light units do 67.5. If the first shot you get hit by is from a heavy unit, then more power to you, because that's exactly what you want. For the next 0.35 seconds, almost no unit will be able to deal any damage to you. Unfortunately, it does not work the other way around, so if the first shot happens to be from a light unit, you're very likely to get triple tapped and killed if you are far away from cover. You might be thinking, 0.35 seconds? Sounds irrelevant. Well, you'd be surprised.
It's a setup. Damn Bragg sold us out.
Farewell, dear friends. We'll not meet again, I think.
Now, let's talk about armor and how it works. Let's say you have 20 armor because you're playing with 2-piece suit and a heavy unit hits you. Remember that the damage they inflict is equal to 225, so you might think getting shot once is a huge issue, but that's not the case because very few units can pierce the armor. That means that as long as you have 1 point of armor, you will not take health damage, which is why Bullseye Basic is arguably the best skill in the game when it comes to death sentence. Sometimes people are confused why death sentence content creators want the lightest armor, or only use Bullseye Ace in specific builds, and if you are one of them, then hopefully this helps you understand why we do that. Up to about now, the tips provided should be enough to make DS somewhat normal to play. Of course, knowing about these tips alone doesn't guarantee that a heist will go smoothly, but with enough practice and understanding of these tips, your playing experience on the difficulty will improve significantly. Targeting in Payday is pretty weird. Saying use cover is a pretty obvious and no-brainer statement, but cover in this game serves an additional purpose. This is where things get more interesting and quite funny. You must know two things about the AI in this game. It has aimbot and warhack, but despite that, cover is your best friend. Why is it your best friend? Well, it's because the aimbot can only work if they see you directly. This is what we call line of sight, and it is an important term in this game. Line of sight is the reason why leaving the place you were hiding in immediately is not always the greatest idea. Once the cops start engaging you, you will have to stay hidden for a few seconds in order for them to stop. Sometimes there are situations where you get shot immediately after peeking slightly. So if that does happen, then it's because you're letting the cops trigger their aimbot, and therefore will not stop pre-firing that spot for a short while.
So we can find and release Bane. Okay, now you've got to get into the control room. Maybe try that. Thermite you found before.
This is why you can't peek and hide in one spot every second unless you kinda pre-fire the cops yourself. If you keep dying to pre-firing cops, now you know the secret that will allow you to deal with it.
Through those bars if you can find something suitable.
Shooting with an unsilenced or unsuppressed weapon can draw all enemy aggro regardless of where you are. Converted cops and bots are usually in the open with their loud and unsilenced weapons, which is why they're so powerful. They're very effective tools that give you much greater openings on the map and make the game much easier.
Dozers can be danced around. They're tanky and look threatening, but if you're close to them and just abuse a little bit of their movement, they'll fail to do anything to you. Although remember, you have to be careful because they can punch you if you get too close and stand in front of them. Another interesting thing about the enemy AI is how the same units are not the same. Scripted spawns are faster and more dangerous, so the both Guardians on Alaskan Deal aren't the same as the units that you will fight from every other spawn. The same can be said about the starting gangsters on Goat Simulator Day 2. They do very little damage, but they are relentless to the point where you might find yourself dead within seconds if you are not careful enough. the most important thing about the enemy AI is how their logic works. Remember when I said cops get aggressive on Fate? Now I'll explain why. So Fate is when cops stop spawning, which also means there will be fewer units on the map because you'll kill them. Funnily enough, by doing this, you kinda boost their power at the same time without even knowing it. In this game, all cops share one brain. To make it simple, think about it this way. The fewer enemies on the map, the stronger they become. Do you know what this means? Killing non-stop is not always the best solution. Remember that if your team is mediocre, you will not be able to clean the entire map on your own with 4-player spawns. And this is why sometimes you might want to hide in some room and let cops spawn to later kite and do objectives easier.
There are other things to consider when playing the game, so we will go over some of them. Each of the tips will be rated separately this time, since these are miscellaneous stuff, and some of them depend entirely on your playstyle, while some depend on the situation you're in. One of the easiest mistakes to make is not knowing how to do objectives. And no, we're not talking about not knowing what to press to interact with something, but how your position and camera placement can dictate whether you live or die. You know that learning enemy spawns and killing them fast is important. You also know that reducing the number of cops is not always the optimal play. Killing in this game can be a bit complicated at times, and the fact that there's more to talk about doesn't make things easier, but this has to be said. You killing lots of enemies does not necessarily mean you're useful. There's a difference between killing smart and killing for the sake of it. Leaving your team and the objective to kill some units that are far away means your contribution to finishing the heist is nearly non-existent. This is why having the most kills in the team does not necessarily mean you did better than people with the lower kill count. If you're playing with an experienced team, this doesn't matter as much, but in general, smart killing is something you should be aware of. This depends on the deployable on its own. Medic bags and ammo bags can be accessed with assets, so unless you're in a bad spot, sharing them isn't going to be a game changer. Things change when it comes to first aid kits though. No map allows you to get them through assets, and remember that you have 14 of them, assuming you've got the right skills. If you're learning the game, you might want to hang on to them, but after getting some experience, I really doubt that you'll need all of them in order to survive. They're great for forcing objectives, and so pre-placing them near objectives or sharing them with your team when they're about to go for one is something that would not hurt anyone. Once you step into the DS territory, you will see arguments about Inspire all the time for different reasons. There are people who believe Inspire Aced is only for noobs, others believing anything can be done with Inspire Ace can also be done with either Inspire Basic or no Inspire at all. On the other side, there are people who believe Inspire Ace is mandatory or just very worth having. Ultimately, it's up to you how you perceive this, and there's not much wrong with either of the playstyles. Since it's my guide and my playstyle, however, I highly recommend getting it on most of the builds. My personal view on it goes like this. There might be times where I ignore my team if they're not doing great, but I'm not a fan of this self-centered playstyle for the most part. 120 points is so much that I don't see the need to sacrifice a skill that makes all games much smoother for more DPS skills that will allow me to get more kills, which don't necessarily change much. Not only that, but I've seen people who are considered good players or people who say this skill is a waste of points fail heists multiple times exactly because they did not have Inspire Aced. One of the worst things about this game is how unfair it can be towards anyone who isn't the host. Clients are often forced to play more passively unless they're running meta builds, because a bit of desync can cause unbelievable mess. Spawn camping enemies can be a great tool, but in this case it can also do more harm than good. Desync allows for cops to shoot you before you can see them. How exactly does this happen? Well, they can perform two animations at the same time. For example, climbing and shooting. Considering all cops often need is 3 shots to kill you, being forced to stay back because of an odd bug is not something that falls under the definition of fun. Small tip, not very useful in most games, but hostages slow cops down. Dominating cops is mostly done in order to prepare for trades, but by doing this you also give yourself a bit more time because it extends the control state for 10 seconds and forces some of the cops to focus on getting the dom back to their team. Dominated cops can extend control, but there's one more reason to get them: your team. The importance of this depends entirely on your connection. Getting a joker if your ping is high can be more difficult than one might think, and getting help during that time is greatly appreciated. If your connection is fine, it won't change that much, but more teamwork never hurts. The type of throwable you bring and how you use it can affect both you and the team. Unless you're using a perk deck that has a throwable of its own, the most common throwables are concussion grenades and molotovs. Concussion grenades come with a powerful stun at a decent range and can be used for different purposes, whether it's for moving between cover, slowing down rushing enemies, or covering for you or your team while performing objectives or manually reviving allies. Molotovs are mainly brought to help players achieve a high Zerk percentage, but they are also capable of blocking off spawn points or tight areas, which can come very handy in gaining map control or for performing objectives. To some degree, treat them like first aid kits. They allow you to force objectives and can greatly help your team. Spamming F can be a game changer. When you get flashed or suddenly shot from behind, this is the first thing you should be doing. Hitting Bullseye is insanely important, but having 100% headshot accuracy is rather inhuman, and this is when this trick comes in handy. Remember that as long as you deal 1 point of damage to a cop, yelling at them will most likely make them surrender. Mashing F and shooting at the same time can save your life if you're flashed, and if you get shot from behind, there's a chance that the cop was already damaged enough for it to be possible, which is easier to execute than getting a headshot. Enough learning for today. Let's have fun with a short test instead to see how much you understand about the game now. It's pretty simple. First, you'll watch a short clip. Then you will have 10 seconds to choose the right answer. Keep in mind sometimes there will be more than one correct answer. The only difference is that some might be worth more points. Speaking of which, count all of your points, because after the test I will display a scoreboard and you'll see whether there's a lot you have to learn or not. Also, to make this more interesting, I recorded some mistakes on purpose, and it will be your job to choose what I did wrong. Don't take this too seriously. After all, my way of playing this game isn't objectively the best. It's very effective for sure though. Getting out of the boat by using the left side is usually more dangerous, so option C is the first one to go. As for the other two, the perk deck I'm using in this situation matters very little. There are cops around and I'm in the open, but despite that, it is indeed safe to go. Option B was also the wrong choice. So, what happened here was me making use of enemy targeting. Remember when we talked about line of sight? Notice that my teammate is the one who just triggered it, which means most of the aggro will be on him for a short while. This gives me a great opportunity to push forward with him and get out of the boat with nearly non-existent risk. You saw Dozer dancing can destroy them, but this time it would be the worst thing to do. The area is very tight, and in order to perform it, I would need to expose myself to all cops around by having to jump. I also just placed a first aid kit, which means running away from it and a green Dozer who is already close would basically be the same as asking to die. Bullseye gating and killing the Dozer is the only reasonable option here. Just killing the Dozer would be a totally fine option if I knew whether my uppers is active or not. It's best to pay attention to such stuff, but sometimes you might not hear the sound if something chaotic is happening. To prevent getting shot again, we're gonna perform Dozer dancing. As you can see, this movement strategy just saved me from going to jail. My armor was broken by a cop behind. This alone should force me to first take care of any enemy that was left there, and then slowly check whether the room I was aiming for is safe. This is a very, very terrible play. Bad camera placement, bad position. As said before, do not stare into walls when going for objectives. Both answers are correct. Covering on its own is enough, but there's no reason for you not to share a first aid kit with your teammate either. The left side is dangerous. Use the right one if you can. They do not react at all. An unsilenced weapon is what causes them to be aggressive. There's more stuff we could cover, but there's already an overwhelming amount of information, so for now, this is where we'll stop. Hopefully, your death sentence experience improves now, and most of the mysteries behind it are, well, no longer mysteries, since you'll be prepared to stop everything the game is gonna throw at you. This guide focused more on mechanics and how I see the game, but if you want more map specific tips and strats, KevKilled's DS guide is where you should go next. If you learn everything from both guides and practice a bit, there will be very little left to learn about this game. There are also solos with crazy restrictions, but this is basically a different game and we might want to leave it for a different video. Thanks for watching. Here's hoping we meet on CrimeNet one day.